Barry Gibb had it all: fame, fortune, and a love story that defied the odds. For over 50 years, he and Linda Gray stood strong through superstardom and heartbreaking loss. While Hollywood marriages crumbled, theirs endured. But now, rumors are swirling, whispers about Linda and their marriage are surfacing. But wait, Barry has finally confirmed the truth. Now let's find out what that secret truth Gibb finally revealed. Like every other artist, Barry Gibb's life was also full of struggle and hard work, but one thing that gave him some heartbreak was his marriage. So without any wait, let's take a sneak peek at his personal life, musical career, and failed and successful marriages. Barry Allen Crompton Gibb entered the world on September 1, 1946, at Jane Crookall Maternity Home in Douglas, Isle of Man. His parents, Hugh and Barbara Gibb, were Manchester natives, and music was already in his blood. His father was a drummer, always hustling gigs at local hotels. Over recent years, Sun Monday Night has formed a pretty close bond with the big brother of the BeeGees, Barry Gibb. We've been there through some pretty tumultuous times with him, particularly when he was wrestling with the loss of his beloved twin brothers, Robin and Maurice. While Hugh played for strangers, Barbara stayed home raising their growing family. But life had a way of throwing curveballs early on. When Barry was just 2 years old, he reached for a teapot on the table, tipping scalding hot water all over himself. The burns were so severe that doctors gave him only 20 minutes to live. No modern treatments, no quick solutions, just the hope that his tiny body would somehow pull through. And it did. He survived, but to this day he has no memory of the months he spent in the hospital, just the scars that never faded. By 1949, the Gibbs had settled at 50 St. Catherine's Drive, and later that year, twin brothers Robin and Maurice were born. The house was filled with noise, 3 young boys with endless energy, and before long, that energy found its rhythm. In the mid-1950s, Barry and his brothers picked up instruments and started making music. What else could they do? It was in their bones. They formed a skiffle group called the Rattlesnakes, performing covers of Buddy Holly, the Everly Brothers, and Paul Anka. Their first big gig was at the Gaumont Cinema on December 28, 1957. But every band has its growing pains. Barry's guitar snapped in two by a bandmate, their name scrapped and replaced with Wee Johnny Hayes and the Blue Cats. The group evolved, the sound sharpened, and one thing became clear: Barry and his brothers weren't just another childhood band. They were onto something. What were the odds that 3 brothers from a tiny island would one day take over the music world? They'd go from schoolyard gigs to defining an entire era of sound. No one could have guessed it then, but the journey had begun. In August 1958, the Gibb family packed their lives and boarded the Fair Sea, setting sail from England to Australia. They weren't alone. Future Skyhooks guitarist Red Simmons, as well as Kylie Minogue's parents, were on board. But this wasn't a luxury cruise for the Gibbs, but a leap of faith. They were part of an assisted migration program, hoping for a better future on the other side of the world. Barry and his younger brothers Robin and Maurice quickly found their place, not in school, but on stage. In 1959, they started singing between races at the Redcliffe Speedway, earning whatever they could. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. And it was there that a local radio DJ, Bill Gates, took notice. He saw something special in them, their harmonies and Barry's songwriting. Songs like Let Me Love You and Underneath the Starlight of Love made him ask for more. By 1961, Barry had made a life-changing decision. He quit school to pursue music full-time. The family moved again to Surfers Paradise, where the brothers played in hotels and clubs. By 1963, they officially became the BeeGees and signed with Festival Records. Barry, the group's heart, wrote all their early singles, crafting songs that would soon make waves far beyond Australia. It wasn't long before their talent caught the right ears. By 1967, they were back in the UK, where a live audition with music mogul Robert Stigwood changed everything. That same day, their song New York Mining Disaster 1941 was released in the UK, and just like that, the BeeGees were on their way to stardom. Stigwood became their manager, guiding them to their first international album, BeeGees First. The album's second single, To Love Somebody, would go on to be covered by hundreds of artists, cementing Barry as one of the great songwriters of his generation. Fame came fast, and so did the pressures that came with it. Barry found himself in the orbit of music legends, once being introduced to John Lennon at London's Speakeasy Club. But in true rock and roll fashion, Lennon barely turned around, simply tossing a Hadoop over his shoulder. "So I met John Lennon's back," Barry would later joke. But behind the scenes, things weren't always smooth. By the end of 1967, the strain of success took its toll. Both Barry and Robin collapsed from exhaustion while traveling from Australia to Turkey. In 1969, tensions in the band reached a breaking point when "First of May" was chosen as the BeeGees' new single over Lamplight. Rob, feeling overshadowed, decided to go solo. Suddenly the trio was down to two. With Maurice by his side, Barry kept pushing forward, writing and producing for other artists like Samantha Sang and P.P. Arnold. But as the decade closed, so did a chapter for the BeeGees. By 1970, the BeeGees were no more. They had been on top of the world a year earlier, harmonizing their way through hit after hit, but egos clashed, tensions boiled over, and suddenly Barry found himself alone. No brothers, no band, just him and a dream that suddenly felt much lonelier. Still, he wasn't one to sit around and mope. That February, he started recording his first solo album, The Kid's No Good. He released a single, I'll Kiss Your Memory, a tender, country-tinged ballad with all the makings of a hit, except it wasn't. The song barely made a ripple in the UK or US, though it found some love in the Netherlands. The rest of the album never saw the light of day. Bootlegs would keep it alive in whispers, but for Barry, it must have felt like a false start, a dream slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, the last remnants of the BeeGees past lingered. Cucumber Castle hit the shelves in April. It is a BeeGees album, just Barry and Maurice. Robin had walked away, chasing his solo ambitions, and Barry wasn't ready to fight to bring him back. The wounds were still fresh. He focused on his music, performing at a beauty pageant in Germany, but the stage felt different now. "I miss people," he admitted. No band, no brothers, just him, trying to figure out where he belonged. That summer, he flew to Australia, acting as a host for Go Set, a music magazine. In an interview he was honest, brutally so. 16 months after the breakup, he still couldn't argue with his brothers. They were family, sure, but a band? Not anymore. And yet, despite their silence, there was still a pull. By August, something had shifted. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was fate. Whatever it was, the BeeGees found themselves in a studio together again. Like old times, they wrote Lonely Days and How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, songs drenched in the longing only a broken band of brothers could understand. When How Can You Mend a Broken Heart hit #1 in America, it was clear, the BeeGees weren't done. Barry, always the creative force, still had moments when he thought about a solo career. In 1971 he recorded songs for his fan club, including King Kathy. But by 1972, he knew where he belonged. He set his solo dreams aside and poured everything into the band. The BeeGees were his heart and home, and if they were going to make music, they were going to do it together. The early 70s weren't easy. Their music wasn't catching fire the way it once had. By 1974, their record label was losing faith. They were still playing shows, but the venues were smaller and the audiences were quieter. It felt like they were fading, and for a moment, maybe they believed it too. Then came Miami. A fresh start. A new sound. At the suggestion of Eric Clapton, they packed up and moved to the sunshine and palm trees, ready to try something different. Under the guidance of producer Arif Mardin, Barry stumbled upon something that would change everything, his falsetto. It started as a scream, an ad-lib during nights on Broadway. But Mardin caught it and said, "More of that." More of that turned into Jive Talkin', then You Should Be Dancing. Then suddenly, the BeeGees were reborn, not as a nostalgic 60s group, but as the kings of disco. And then came Saturday Night Fever. The soundtrack would define an era. The music that would make Barry Gibb, already a legend, something even bigger. Between December 1977 and September 1978, 7 of his songs hit #1 in the US. 7. It wasn't just BeeGees music. He was writing hits for Andy Gibb, Samantha Sang, and Frankie Valli. Shadow Dancing, Emotion, Grease, Barry's fingerprints were everywhere. But success comes at a price. By 1979, after the Spirits Having Flown tour, Barry was exhausted. He had been carrying the weight of not just his career, but also his brothers, his younger brother Andy, and an entire musical movement. The world saw the BeeGees as unstoppable. But Barry? He was just a man who had once lost his brothers and found them again, only to wonder how long he could keep it all together. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Barry Gibb wasn't just a musician. He was a force, a hitmaker, producer, and brother. He carried the weight of success and personal loss. His life was a whirlwind, moving from one project to the next as if stopping for a moment meant losing himself in the silence. In September 1980, Barry was still deeply involved in Andy Gibb's career, producing 3 new songs for his younger brother's first compilation album, Andy Gibb's Greatest Hits. Andy was still in the spotlight, but Barry, always the big brother, was beside him, guiding and protecting him. And then came another massive project, working with Barbra Streisand on Guilty. The album was a smash, with Woman in Love shooting to #1 in just 5 weeks. The title track, a duet between Barry and Barbra, became an anthem, and What Kind of Fool, another hit, cemented his status as a behemoth and one of the decade's most sought-after songwriters and producers. But even as he worked magic for others, things weren't going as smoothly for the BeeGees. Their 1981 album Living Eyes took a different turn. Less disco, more introspective. The result? It barely made a dent commercially. Times were changing, and the disco backlash was in full force. It was a hard pill to swallow. Just a few years ago, they were unstoppable, and now the world was moving on without them. Still, Barry kept going. In 1982, Clive Davis tapped him to write for Dionne Warwick. The result, Heartbreaker, is a record filled with Barry's signature touch. He was shaping the decade's sound, even if his band struggled to find its place. By 1983, another legend came knocking, Kenny Rogers. Barry penned Eyes That See in the Dark, and then, almost as an afterthought, Islands in the Stream, a duet for Rogers and Dolly Parton. That song, it didn't just top the country charts, it became one of the biggest country hits ever. Barry had done it again, crafting a timeless, universally loved song that would live far beyond the moment it was written. But as Barry's success soared, so did the fractures within the BeeGees. He signed a solo deal with MC in 1983, stepping out from the group's shadow. Now Voyager followed in 1984, a deeply personal album that didn't quite take off commercially. The film accompanying it, a surreal, almost dreamlike journey through life and death, showed a different side of Barry. One single, Shine, Shine, did well, but the album itself felt like a whisper in a world that had been used to his roaring success. Maybe the world wasn't ready for Barry on his own. In 1985, he wrote for Diana Ross, co-creating most of the songs on Eaten Alive. Meanwhile, he helped Robin with his album Walls Have Eyes and dabbled in other projects, including forming the short-lived Bunbury's supergroup. The work never stopped. But something was missing. Maybe it was the connection, the magic that he felt when he was creating with his brothers. By 1987, that connection was rekindled. The BeeGees were back in the studio, working on their first album in 6 years. At the same time, Barry and Maurice were helping Andy with new music. Andy was struggling, but Barry still believed in him and wanted to see him rise again. One of those songs, Arrow Through the Heart, would become heartbreakingly significant years later. Then came more collaborations, Elton John, Corolla, and Lou. In 1990, the BeeGees recorded High Civilization, followed by Size Isn't Everything in 1993. But things were different now. Barry's body was betraying him. Arthritis was taking its toll, making it harder to play guitar and move like he used to. A planned tour was scrapped in 1994. He couldn't do it. How do you cope when the very thing that's defined you, music, performance, is suddenly slipping through your fingers? Still, he kept writing. He co-wrote I Will Be There for Tina Turner, worked on music for Cliff Richard, and even recorded a song with Michael Jackson in 2002, All in Your Name. There was always another project, another song to write, another artist to support. But through it all, the losses were piling up. Andy had passed in 1988, a loss Barry never truly recovered from. And in 2003, Maurice was gone too. Barry had spent a lifetime writing songs about love and loss. But this was something else entirely. How do you put that kind of grief into words? His journey has been anything but easy. Temptations were everywhere, and with a rockstar lifestyle came endless opportunities to make mistakes that ruin lives. But Barry, he stayed true to the one person who always had his back, Linda. And she wasn't just sitting around waiting for him to be faithful. She had her fair share of admirers too. At one point, none other than Steve McQueen, the ultimate Hollywood heartthrob, tried to sweep her away on the back of his motorcycle. Can you imagine? But Linda chose Barry. She always chose him. And maybe that's why Barry never lost himself like his brothers did. Addiction tore through the Gibb family like a hurricane. Andy, the youngest, burned bright and fast, his talent overshadowed. By a battle he couldn't win, by 30 he was gone, his heart giving out after years of substance abuse. Maurice struggled with alcohol, his drinking nearly tearing the BeeGees apart before he finally got sober. And Robin, he faced his demons, his struggles adding to the chaos that often threatened to break the band. But Barry, he never went down that road, not because he wasn't tempted, because let's be real, the 70s music scene was drowning in excess, but because Linda wouldn't allow it. Anytime he tried to bring drugs into their home, she flushed them right down the toilet. No arguments, no second chances. She was determined he wouldn't suffer the same fate as his brothers. Maybe that's the secret to Barry Gibb's survival, not just his music, his talent, but the woman who stood beside him, keeping him grounded when everything around him was spinning out of control. Some people find fame and lose themselves. Barry found Linda and held on for dear life. And through all the heartbreak, all the losses and temptations, he's still here, still standing, still singing. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest love story of them all. But now you tell us in the comments section, was it one of the greatest love stories from the musical industry? Or was it like every other marriage in Hollywood? With that, also make sure to subscribe to the channel.